Document notes. This account arrived in my P.O. box as a diary. Purple cover with glitter, spiral bound, ruled on both sides of each page. It seemed like it must have lain face down in water for some time, as a majority of the pages leading up to the relevant passages are almost completely illegible. Of those that survived, I would say they contained normal day-to-day diary entries. Here's what I had for lunch. The cow kicked over the milk pail again. School sucked, but the boy that I liked looked at me. Some song lyrics and doodles. I haven't the time or the heart to read out the non-relevant passages. It's just some young person's diary, maybe 13 to 15 years old. Likely a girl, living on a farm with her small family. The account follows. November 2nd, 1993. Day 1. We heard the sirens today right after breakfast. I never heard Dad swear so loud, but Mom was too busy wiping the oatmeal off of Baby Jay's face and hauling him out of his high chair to tisk him. Everything we needed was already down in the old cold cellar. I had helped Mom make beef tallow emergency candles, and Dad to clear spaces down there for us to live and sleep. And Dad cooked up some flour and soot paint to cover the 2 little windows that we had down there, before piling field stones against them. He filled in any chinks in the door frame with painty rags and nailed spare lumber over the gaps. Mom brought down all the spare bedding that we had to make up some beds. It would be rough without mattresses, she said, but I think that we had enough old duvets to make it pretty cozy. I carefully stacked our canned food, store-bought and homemade, on one side of the cellar while Dad dug us a toilet in a little back room. He dug it after covering the window in there with paint and rocks, so that he had to dig by the light of one of Mom's tallow candles, making the whole cellar smell beefy. The cellar actually looked pretty nice after we had finished with it. We had time to make it more homey and to fill any gaps in the weeks before the fog wall would hit, so we hung a nice tablecloth on one side and made a dinner table with an old door from the lumber pile. I got some stuffed animals down from my closet upstairs and lined our sleeping spot with them too. Baby Jay got a wash basin as a bed, and I painted flowers on the sides with the rest of Dad's black paint. They didn't look very good, but Mom says it was the thought that counted. So, the hurricane siren went off and Dad swore and Mom got Baby Jay up out of his high chair to get him downstairs. I asked Mom if I could go and get my diary. I had to ask her twice actually with how fussy Baby Jay had gotten. Anyway, she said yeah, but hurry up for God's sake. Dad had snapped on the radio and tuned it to 95.5 FM to see what was going on. I paused a little when he did, but Mom shooed me up the stairs to grab "You Diary" before I could hear more than a few excited sounding words. I checked my window after grabbing "You" and I could see the fog wall from where I was on the 2nd floor. It didn't really look special except that it stretched from one side of the horizon to the other in one gray, smudgy line, like looking at a far-off rainstorm. I saw Dad from the window too. He was jogging to the barn to fill the animal troughs with as much food and as water as we had, and to turn on their nightlight. He spent a lot of time last week charging some old car batteries and hooking them up to a light bulb, so the animals wouldn't go crazy in the dark. I'm really glad that he did. 12 days in darkness sounds like a nightmare. I gave the fog wall one last long look. It was such a nothing. Before all the stores had closed, I heard some customers and salesfolk talking big about how it was some big overblown hoax and that they would stay upside when or if it came. But looking at the wall, I shivered a bit. I hope those people changed their minds. Heck, I heard that you could survive the wall just by hanging your thickest blankets against the windows and hiding in a closet. No lights allowed. And I really hope that's true. I really hope they changed their minds. We got downstairs quick. Once Dad had locked the door, we all sat quiet for a little while, listening to the radio. And Big Steve was going through all the preparations that we should have done in the last weekend. We all listened anxiously. But we had prepared exactly as he and the government had said, and maybe a little bit more. Baby Jay had fallen asleep in my lap, but after maybe half an hour, he woke up and he got scared of the dark. Mom started singing and bouncing him on her knee while me and Dad started looking through board games to play. We pointed one of the two wind-up emergency flashlights against a jar of water to make a better board gaming light, and we played a few games of Scrabble. The wall hit just before dinner. We're pretty much gonna have to eat cold canned stuff because Mom says the smoke from a gas grill or even more than one candle at a time will get dangerous really quick. I was finishing opening a can of creamed corn when Big Steve on the radio started sounding excited. And Dad had told me that the radio station was about parallel to us, so when they went into the wall, we would be really soon after. We had gone out a few weeks ago to paper the whole station up. Big Steve had hosted a big hot dog grill to get the town out, to help him make it all site safe. Dad helped sledge down a man-sized hole in one wall, so Big Steve could get to the emergency generator shed without having to go outside. Anyway, Big Steve said the security camera on the east side had just passed into the wall. He said that it got really staticky, and that we might get some interruptions while the rest of the town went in. It did get staticky for a few minutes, and then it went straight into white noise for a few more. But that's when we heard the fog wall rolling at and over us. Me and Baby Jay sat in the bedding while Mom and Dad waited tensely with our stash of cardboard and tape. We turned out all the lights and I assumed they were looking around everywhere while the wall rolled over us to see if any last-minute light was coming in. Soon, we heard this low sucking sound from upside, getting closer and closer until it was right over us. It was pretty scary at first, almost like a few years ago when we had a tornado nearly pass over us, and we had to spend the night down here. It got really quiet after that. And then the DJ came back on the radio, a little more staticky but not too bad. He was broadcasting to the whole town, and he said, the town in the fog vortex, and we were all a big family now, and here's a tune to help keep us cheerful while we braved this funny little weather phenomenon. He sounded really happy. He sounded like, how do you do before you go on stage? Nervous, but you don't want people to know that you're kind of freaking out. Mom and Dad eventually turned the lights back on when they were sure that no light from outside was coming in, and we ate dinner to Big Steve playing music on the radio. He ate dinner live in the air too. He said that he would keep broadcasting as long as he could through the 12 days that we would be in the wall. After, we all took turns winding the radio and our flashlights. Now Mom and Dad are sitting and holding hands and listening to the radio while I write in you. I'm gonna go to bed soon, but I think I'll be awake for a long time listening to the fog. Day 2. Mom brought an alarm clock down so we wouldn't lose track of time. She set it to ring at 8 a.m. every day, and we're keeping calm by making lines on a support beam with a piece of chalk. Me and hers thought that it was a little funny when we set it up, like we were all doing time in jail. The toilet smells like how I bet a jail toilet smells. It's already making it pretty gross down here, but Dad made some extra ventilation ahead of time, so he says that it shouldn't get too bad, or at least it won't get dangerous. Did you know that a smelly toilet could kill you? Like how too many candles or a gas leak can kill you, I guess. I kept my head leaning towards one of the ventilation tubes while I used the can, and I think I got a breath of air from above, but I'm not so sure. I didn't want to breathe too deeply. The government said the air wasn't what was so dangerous about the fog wall. It was just normal air. Other than that, today was pretty boring. We sat around the light and read or played board games. We napped when we felt like it, and we would listen to the radio. The music is nice, and Big Steve is as cheerful as ever. Baby Jay isn't allowed on the dirt floor, but we let him play around on the bed. I'm glad that he likes all my stuffed animals. Mom and Dad opened a bottle of wine and let me have a little bit too. I think it made my head feel light, but I don't like the taste. It's too bitter. They cheered up a little though, so the evening was more fun, and they actually got to laughing while we played Trivial Pursuit. I thought about the cows and the chickens in the barn. I hope their light was still on. Day 2.5. I'm creeped out. It's night, I guess. At least it's a few hours after we all decided to go to bed, but I'm the only one awake. I had to get up to use the toilet. It's cold tonight though, and my stomach was hurting a bit, so I took the radio into the bathroom and turned it on really low while I sat on the toilet. It's just a bucket with the bottom cut out and some planks across it, set across the hole that Dad had dug. We have another bucket of spare dirt beside us to scoop into the toilet when we were done to keep the smell down. I had the radio on super low and I pressed to one ear while I sat. Some music was on for a while, but soon Big Steve comes back on air, but he's sounding a little bit different. Quieter. Not like I have the volume down quieter, but like he's almost whispering into the microphone quieter. He says, "Welcome back, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the town and the fog wall. We got a new one here for you tonight. I got up to take a trip down to the little boy's room. Thank God for septic tanks. Can I get an amen? And I took a peek at our security cameras while I did, as I wanted to do. But there isn't much to look at out there in that fog wall most of the time. Y'all ain't missing much, it's fog. But I'll be kidding if I didn't catch a little bit of movement out there in the west parking lot. We got a little LED light hooked up out there. Not much of a power draw, and it's good to have a light on in the night in case any raccoons feel like ransacking the place. But tonight, I did not see a raccoon. I saw..." Big Steve trailed off there for a sec. "Well, family, I don't know quite what I saw. It was big, but not like an elephant big. Like it wasn't solid or thick. Kinda looked like a hairball blew across the camera lens, truth be told. And that might have been very well what it was. All fuzzy and out of focus and looking to be carried on a breeze from out yonder." He paused again. "I wish Sunday Sue decided to stay up here so I could get a second opinion. But she drove out on Monday to keep an eye on her family. Sunday Sue, if you're out there, I hope that you're doing fine and well. I'm good up here, but an old man does miss his co-host." He chuckled. "Okay, folks, sorry to creep you out in the middle of the night. As a penitence, I'll drag out some carpenters to keep us in the long hours, and I'll get back to some good old-fashioned shut-eye." Guitar music started playing. I stayed on the toilet until my butt hurt, but it seemed like Big Steve really did go to bed. So I went back to bed too. But I kept the radio on close to my ear as I lay there. I tried to listen above me for sounds in the fog, and I wrote in this diary. Day 4. I was still feeling a little sick yesterday, so I mostly stayed in the bed and read some books. Mom and Dad thought the wine might have upset my stomach. I think the toilet smell is getting to me. It smells so gross that I try to eat and drink less so I don't have to use it. And Dad had hung air fresheners after digging the toilet hole, but they don't do much unless you hold them against your nose. I'm breathing through my mouth mostly now, and luckily I have a ventilation pipe near my side of the bed. I think that I can smell fresh air through it, cool and a little damp. I felt better today, so Mom sat me down with my math textbook, and we worked on some problems. She's really good at trigonometry, but I can't stand it. I can get it when it's being explained to me. Everything that she says makes sense when she goes through all of the steps. But once she hands me a new equation and asks me to solve it, it all flies away. She wants me to go to university, but I don't even know what I want to study. I like English, but she says that if I want to get an English major, I might as well get into trades and be a plumber or something instead. If I was a plumber, maybe I could figure out a better toilet. And day 4.5. I can't sleep. Sounds above us. We started hearing it as we were getting ready for bed. Mom and me were shaking out the bed liners when Dad had shushed us. He was standing near the door with his head cocked upwards. He looked whiter than the sheets. We stopped and listened too. First, there was nothing. Every once in a while for the past 4 days, we would hear the familiar sound of cows lowing from the barn. They had gone quiet too, like they were listening with us. And then I heard it. A sound like someone sweeping the floor with a straw broom, coming out of the fog very slowly towards our hiding place. The radio was already on quiet, but Mom dropped her corner of the blanket that we were holding and snapped the radio off. We let absolute silence fill the pantry as whatever it was passed over us. When it groaned, I almost screamed out loud. I actually clapped both hands over my mouth. Mom and Dad didn't so much as look at me. Baby Jay kept sleeping, thank God. The groan warbled on above us, louder and louder, but still not much above a whisper, following the side of the house. Eventually it peaked right above us. Mom threw her hand out to me and I gripped it silently. I can't remember the last time that I held her hand. Baby Jay, though, shifted in his wash basin bed and started fussing. Mom let me go immediately to pick him up and started rocking him gently, sparing a few terrified glances up as she did. I think I heard the barest pause and these strange sweeping footsteps above us, but the groan remained unbroken. It was finally moving away. Baby Jay had fallen back asleep. We all stood like that for minutes after, all staring at the ceiling. After we were certain that it was gone, we shared a silent group hug, and then we all went to bed and all lay in the quiet with the radio turned off. They came back though, or more moved through. Mom and Dad and Baby Jay are asleep again, and I'm up listening to what sounds like a whole herd of brooms walking along above us, every once in a while letting out one of those terrible drawn-out moans. It's so quiet, but it's there. I tried to hold it, but eventually I had to get up and pee. I took the radio and turned it on so quiet that for a few moments I thought that it was still muted. I sat on the can and I listened. And then Big Steve came on whispering, and I realized that he must have been listening too. "There goes another one," he breathed just above the faint static. "Folks, I think we're in a herd of these things. Now hold on 1 second." There was the sound of a chair shifting. And then Big Steve's voice came from further away in a stage whisper. "God, that isn't the spookiest thing I've ever seen." A very long pause, the sound of him sitting down again. "Sorry folks, the cameras are on the outside of my booth and I gotta really stretch my mic cord to be able to see them. And that's still from 10 feet away. Kinda wish that I hadn't gotten up to take a closer look because they are capital C creepy." You can hear him sipping water and clearing his throat. Another pause and then he comes back even quieter. "They just drift, really. Their feet barely touch the ground. It must be so light. National TV says they do something to the security tapes, and sure enough, after seeing that first one the other night, I checked the tape and it was all messed up and staticky and blue screen, flickers, the whole shebang. Like I had run it through the wash with my biggest electromagnets. But the live feed still comes in pretty good. For now at least. I think I sat on the toilet for another half an hour, barely noticing the stink and just listening to Big Steve describe the things moving around above us. They shifted and groaned as he thought out loud about where the fog wall came from and what these strange creatures moving within it were. I had seen plenty of TV show hosts and experts talk about this. Some people said aliens. More said that they were people who got changed when they looked into the fog. The programs usually had a drawing from a survivor who had seen one through a security camera like Big Steve. It always looked like a tangled mat of yarn, usually with a big question mark pasted over it by the TV station. They said the things did never try to break in or anything, but I knew that Dad had brought down his shotgun and kept it tucked under the pile of quotes that we used as a mattress on the side. When I finally got up and finished my business, my legs were all pins and needles. I tried to shake feeling back into them while taking a few deep breaths of the fresh air streaming in from the ventilation pipe beside the can. The way the cellar worked had the pipe coming out at above head level for me, so I could just stand and let the air wash over me, cool and damp. The pins and needles faded and I closed my eyes for a second, thinking about being back up there in broad daylight and crisp, near frigid November air. I stopped breathing when a brushing footstep and a groan echoed from what sounded like within the pipe. The sound came in so clearly that it was like it was standing outside with them. I felt my hands grip the radio tightly. The groan got louder. It got louder and closer, like whatever it was making it was pushing its head down the pipe. I finally managed to move a few steps back, but I was staring at the end of the pipe and I couldn't look away. Deep in its mouth, I thought that I saw the faintest pulse of light. It seemed to beat steadily for a few moments, before fading to nothing along with the groan. A pause and then the sound of sweeping footsteps moving away. I stood with my back against the rough stone wall that separated the toilet from the main room. I stared into the now pitch-black pipe and started to shiver all over. I went back to bed and I lay with my flashlight and radio on, and I wrote in my diary. The light is just about out now. I don't want to make any noise by winding it. The radio's already dead. I'll try to sleep. Day 5. Mom and Dad heard Big Steve talking about the things in the fog today. He repeated his story about them sweeping in during the night again and again, and they seemed to get more and more upset every time that he did. Big Steve, though, he sounded more and more, comfortable every time he told the story. I decided not to tell Mom and Dad about what I thought that I saw last night. I think that I was just really creeped out by the sounds on the radio. There's no light inside the pipe today. I checked and we hadn't heard anything move above since last night. The cows are even back to mooing every so often. I hope they're still doing well. They sound pretty fine to me. More board games, more napping, more studying. We're doing biology today and learning about photosynthesis. I thought that I had a pretty good idea of how it worked, but it turns out there's a whole dark reaction part of it that even Mom has to take time to read to herself to understand. She was a geologist before having me and Mary and Dad, though, so at least she can understand a lot of the chemistry stuff. It's weird. I didn't know much about what Mom was doing before she had me. She never really talked about it before, but during a homework break, she told me a few stories about her field work and the Yukon before she had married Dad. It's kind of nice. Maybe after all this, we'll be a little bit closer. Day 6. Halfway done. It's been so boring. No light from the pipe today. Didn't hear anything last night. It still smells here. Dad joked that once we were out of here, we're gonna burn all the clothes and linens out back because the smell has gotten into them so much. We're getting really restless, so we played charades all afternoon to try to tire us out, and Mom made a special dessert for after dinner. It was just cherry pie filling with crushed graham crackers on top, but it was really good anyway. I like how you get a burst of juice when you bite into a cherry. We've been eating straight out of cans, passing it around with a spoon and taking bites because we can't really clean our dishes. We keep the old cans and jars in a garbage bag in the bathroom, so at least the smell is kept all in one spot. We tried lighting a candle near the main room's ventilation pipe to force a draft, but I don't think it made a difference. Tomorrow we'll be over the hump and there will only be 5 days left. Day 6.5. Still no light from the pipe and no sounds above us. Big Steve is back on though. He's been counting how many Myuupastas east facing camera. So far he's at 51 tonight. Day 7. Another boring day. I know we're on the downslope, but it sucks so bad down here. I don't know what I'll do first when I get back upside. Probably check on the animals with Dad. We'll open the doors and let them get any little last bit of grass from the fields. I'm gonna kiss each cow in the nose and hug each chicken. None of the cows need milking, thank goodness, though there will probably be some eggs that are on their way to becoming baby chicks. They have to stay in their eggs for longer than us. Poor little guys. I hope Dad lets us keep them. Day 7.5. They're moving above us again. It's very late and I don't know how Mom and Dad can stay asleep through the moans and footsteps. It's stupid that I have to keep getting up to pee. I'm trying to stay under the covers for as long as I can, but I gotta go. I'll be back, taking the radio. There's light inside the pipe again. I was doing my usual thing and went to get my breath of fresh air when I saw it. I covered it up with my sweater straight away. Big Steve was on the radio and I listened while I watched the pipe. To those just tuning in, I made some minor miscalculations with the gas when we were setting up the place. I'm keeping everything but the radio equipment off. I've redone the arithmetic and we should have enough to get us through to the last day if I take nights off. But for this evening, I'm feeling mighty lonely, so we're gonna stay on. I can't see anything outside, of course, with these security cameras off, but I think I've heard some of them passed when I was down taking a leak. Or using the facilities. Nothing comes through the soundproofing up here in the booth, of course. He stopped to clear his throat. The sound of shuffling papers and then gruffly, "How about some music?" He put on one of my favorites, Stargazing by Pawnworks. It's a low and slow one. There's some violin and it always makes me kind of sad. Afterwards, it wound down into silence and only after a while did Big Steve come back on, speaking quietly. "Sometimes they'll touch each other, just barely brushing fingertips like. And when they do, their movement will kind of sync up and they'll sway together. It's hypnotizing, like watching wind pass over a sea of wheat." Another long pause and another song played. I watched the pipe, another song, and then Steve came back on again. "Alright folks, I think that'll wrap it up for tonight. I'll power down for a few hours and see you bright and early tomorrow morning for some more music. Big Steve signing off." Day 8. Big Steve barely came on the radio to speak today. It was mostly music. I don't think Mom and Dad noticed. They didn't notice when I started taking longer and longer bathroom breaks either. More biology lessons. Haven't heard the cows in a while. Day 9. Big Steve wasn't on the radio today. No music, just static. Mom and Dad seemed worried. Very quiet in the shelter, kept checking pipe. Day 9.5. He's doing nights. We kept the radio on low all evening, and after dinner he finally comes on, cheerful as can be. "Good morning," he boomed. His intro sound effects played, a hoarse whiny, a revving motor and a honking horn. "Welcome back to 95.5, the Bear FM. I'm your host Big Steve, and I'm broadcasting to all my good friends and families here in the valley. We have a heck of a mixtape for you today, if you'd pardon my French. So let's get this rock a-rollin'." We all stayed up late listening to the music. Mom said that he must have slept in or felt under the weather during the day. I think so too. I'm really glad that he's back. I didn't want to guard the pipe without my DJ. The light in the pipe is still so weak that I have to keep it uncovered so I can make sure that it doesn't get brighter. Lots of rustling and groaning outside. Mom and Dad and baby Jay don't wake up though. Big Steve comes on to talk about them up above. "Remember when the fog first rolled out of the Atlantic? Scary, 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 scary. All those people living on the coast didn't know how to hide from the light. Can't remember the number of disappearances. Must have been in the millions, whatever the population of Newfoundland was. Everybody thought they were vaporized or some such at first, like the fog was an acid. And maybe something about that's true. But I think we nailed it second try when we started thinking that those things walking around out there were all those missing people." Pause. I leaned in closer to the light. I breathed in the air from above. "I'm glad they're out there together, and disappearing all alone is one thing. Disappearing while holding the hand of your wife or kid is another. We should all be so lucky." No more radio for that night, no music either. The light pulsed in the pipe, and after a long time standing and staring at it, I noticed that the concrete the tube was set in looked like it was flaking off in places. I poked at it and a large piece fell away, showing the hasty gravel and rock while the dad had balanced the pipe in before slapping it with a concrete slurry. I remembered that it had rained the day that he had installed the ventilation. I started picking at it, throwing the spare pieces into the toilet as I went. I had dug a fair bit into the wall when I heard one of my parents shift around in bed in the other room. I stood still and waited for it to come again. It did so. I decided to get out of there. The hole that I had made was on the far side of the pipe, and more or less invisible to anybody coming in and using the toilet. I threw the last piece into the toilet and tossed in some of the dirt from the bucket after it. I went to bed. Day 10.5. Mom and Dad stayed up late again to listen to the radio. Big Steve hadn't come on. The music snapped on sometime after dinner, already in the middle of a song. Mom and Dad exchanged a look, but they kept listening for hours. Had to wait a long time to guard the tube. This time, I took a table knife. We weren't using them at all to eat out of our cans, so I knew that it wouldn't be missed. I started back to work on the hole in the wall. Before long, one last piece of concrete on the other side of the head-height hole fell away, and a shaft of orange light flowed in the bathroom. I dropped the knife to the ground and pressed my face against the hole. I let the fresh air wash over me. Outside was totally silent, draped in a fog that obscured the sight of the fence around our property only a few dozen feet away. I sat there and I bathed in the night air and glow from the fog. After a while, the music that was playing quietly over the radio switched off and I could hear the sound of Big Steve breathing on the other end. It was like we both sat there in silence looking out into the night waiting. We didn't have to wait for long. A faint brushing sound soon rose out of the fog. I held my breath and pressed my other eye to the hole to try to see around the corner of the house. Big Steve also seemed to hold his breath. After an indeterminable amount of time, the walkers in the fog drifted around the corner and I saw it in full view.
Just beautiful.
Big Steve breathed, and I sighed in agreement. It was taller than a man but walked almost like one. It had 2 legs and 2 arms anyway, frayed things that drifted up and away from what I supposed were shoulders, equally loose tangles of what Steve had described as yarn, and 2 legs that barely brushed along the ground to move it along. It had a head, again looking like a loose handful of hair pulled off a brush, and a chest that all of that attached to. It looked like something familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Its core glowed with the same orange light of the fog, only a little brighter. It seemed to swim along the side of her house with one hand, whispering across the siding. When it came close, I realized what it looked like. I had been paging through my biology textbook a few days ago and ended up on a 2-page spread showing the human cardiovascular system. Fluffy clouds of veins and thicker highways of major arteries jammed into a humanoid silhouette. That's what these things looked like, only if they had spread out a lot to drift more freely in the fog. It was beautiful. I felt pressure rise in my chest as it drew closer along the house. It dropped out of sight momentarily as it approached the 90-degree angle where the house met the southern door, its low wall into my little hole. It reappeared only a foot away from my face, floating serenely on the tips of its feet. I didn't realize that I had been holding my breath until I let it out in one gust. I saw it move the dark orange capillaries of its nearest leg, and the creature stopped slowly and turned to face the gap. I instinctively drew back a little. Something that I could call a hand meandered down from somewhere above unseen. Tiny thread-like tips questing along the sides of the hole. I watched it and I felt like I was floating. I heard Big Steve murmur, "They're us, just more connected to the world. Maybe they're connected to another one too. Another world in the fog." A thread of orange capillary brushed one of my cheeks like a spiderweb. A comforting warmth grew from that spot and radiated out into my body. It felt like being seen, being understood. I heard Big Steve's voice now, not from the radio but from what seemed to be just over my shoulder. "Yesterday I took the sledgehammer from downstairs and opened up the side of the studio wall with it. They're all lined up in the parking lot and swaying like seaweed in the tide." I'm not sure how long I stood there in the light. By the time that I came back, the creature was gone and I felt very, very tired. I went back to bed, wrote everything down. I'm tired. Day 11. Mom and Dad and Baby Jay found the hole while I was sleeping. I got up and they were all packed into the bathroom and staring out at a sea of the creatures. It looked like they had even widened it a bit, so we had a space around the size of a teacup saucer to bathe in. The fresh air and the view was so nice, but Mom and Dad got so close to the hole that I could only see it a little. Still so tired, I brought the radio and my diary into the bathroom to listen and watch and write. It doesn't even smell bad in here anymore, and Baby Jay's thoughts are so relaxing, all wrapped up in his blankie and held in Mom's arms like he is. I'm starting to remember what it felt like when I was a baby. November 14th, 1993, Day 12. It's hard to hold the pencil. Mom and Dad have gone transparent, so now the light can come in and wash over me. Baby Jay has a lot less body to be filled with the light, so he's already stretched out completely in Mom's arms, draping over them and near the floor and so content. My hands don't feel too weak to hold a pencil, just not built for it anymore. My veins and nerves are visible through the skin, which seems to have gone from solid flesh to almost matching the consistency of the fog in only a day. They're all still outside, swaying and waiting. The fog is supposed to clear today, and we weren't to come out until the siren blew again. Maybe the fog will stay, maybe it'll go. I think we're supposed to go with it, but I don't think that I have the hands to open the hole up wider, or even unlock the door to join them. Maybe we'll be allowed to stay and fill the whole cellar with light and fog, even after the main body moves on. I saw Big Steve join the sea outside. He's almost fully changed now, but he still has the same plaid overshirt that I saw him wearing way back when we had helped get a station prepped. Seems forever ago. Now he looks like his shirt is frayed at the sleeves and neck and waist. It kinda looks like his shirt is walking along on its own. Maybe I can see a hint of his skull still. I wonder where all that goes. Is it being dissolved by the light and fog? My own writing hand is a little more than bone wrapped in red and gray thread. I think I'll stop writing very soon. I can hear Mom and Dad now too, and everybody else outside. It's so peaceful to be a part of the fog with them. I thought that it might be a little like how it was after baby Jay was born. All the attention on him, but it's not like that at all. There's so much love in all of us. Goodbye, diary. They're starting to move on. Party notes. I don't know about you all, but I certainly don't remember a fog bank rolling out of the ocean and disappearing people across North America in 1993. I, along with the internet, have also never heard of a band called Pondworks and a song of theirs called Stargazing. I would have written this entire diary off as a piece of fiction if it weren't for an unusual phenomenon that I witnessed when first unboxing it. The entire diary glows faintly with orange light. I have since locked it away separately from my other accounts, in a safe with 2-inch thick iron walls and in a closet behind my winter coats. I haven't noticed any adverse effects since being exposed to the diary, but it'll wait in that safe until I can locate a specialist to analyze it further. As for how it got here, well, a particular passage from the diary sticks out. Something said by that incorrigible radio DJ, Big Steve. They're us, just more connected to the world. Maybe they're connected to another one too. Another world in the fog.